Hi, I'm Gary Harter, the Executive Director for the Utah Department of Veterans and Military Affairs here in the state of Utah. On 9/11, I was a lieutenant colonel in the Army, and I was attending Senior Service College at the National Defense University at Fort McNair in Washington, D.C. It was a normal day. Overall, we were in our classes, and all of a sudden we had televisions in each one of our classrooms, and somebody came in and said, hey, you need to turn on your TVs. And we did. And we had our small group of 20. It was in our staff group, and all the others were as well. And we were watching what was unfolding up in New York City. And just a short period of time later, somebody else ran in our office, in our classroom, and said, the Pentagon's on fire. Now, a number of the people, the 300 of us that were in that, going through that school, a number of them, both civilians and military, had previously been assigned at the Pentagon. So obviously there was lots of concern, not only for all who worked there, but all their friends and colleagues that they had just left a month earlier to join us in school. So all of us did the same thing. We all ran outside and we looked across. We couldn't see the Pentagon directly. We were across the river and we were south of the highway. And in Washington, D.C., the Pentagon sits north of that highway. But we could surely see the smoke billowing out. And up on our rooftop, we could see the flames coming out. Fort McNair was locked down that day. The members of the old guard was stationed over at Fort Myers. They and the military police and the civilian police, they shut everything down. And we waited. We waited for our next orders and what we were going to do. But we continued to monitor the situation. Everybody was uncertain what was going on. Everybody called their families. We all told them we were safe. And those who had colleagues in the Pentagon were doing the same. They were calling their colleagues and their friends. And some they reached and some they didn't. At around 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon, we were finally released. We were told to go home. It was interesting during that time leading up to that. There were lots of rumors that were running along. Were all the planes down? And as we found, there was the 4th plane that came down in the field up in Pennsylvania, up in my home state, where I was from, Pennsylvania. And then the 3 others that unfortunately were accounted for, and the 2 that had gone into New York and the 1 in the Pentagon. But there were a lot of rumors that were running about what was happening in Washington, D.C. We were hearing that there was some attacks over at the Department of State building, that there were attacks up at the Capitol. But the one thing that was very eerie for all of us who had lived in D.C., by that time I had served 2 assignments in the Washington, D.C. area. That city basically evacuated. If those who lived there went home, those who worked there and didn't live in D.C., they went to Virginia, they went to Maryland, wherever they lived, and they went home. That city shut down. And going by the Pentagon, we were finally released about 1 or 2 o'clock, and I drove past the Pentagon. As I did the morning when I come through up to work, I drove past the Pentagon. And driving over, the emotions just ran over me, and I'm sure everybody else. If you're familiar with the Washington, D.C. area, there's a major highway that comes right by the Pentagon. There's 6 lanes in each direction. It is a major artery. That road was basically deserted. I'd never seen so few people on that road, even when I was on that road at 1, 2, 3, 4 a.m. in the morning. There was nobody there. But as you went by the Pentagon, you saw the fires, you saw the emergency responders, and you saw everybody else who was still streaming out of that building where over 20,000 people work each and every day. We went home. We went home, and all of us, and at the time I was in D.C. by myself. My family stayed at our last duty assignment, which was down in Norfolk, on the naval base. I was working a joint assignment at that time. And so I drove the 3 hours straight down, and all I wanted to do was hug my kids and hug my wife, which we did. And I knew there were a lot of people that weren't going to be able to do that night because of the terrorist attacks that our country experienced that day. A few days later, our classes were back in session, and we came on back in. And on one of those days coming up on that major highway, when you're coming up to this from the south into the city, you can't see the city. The highway goes up a little bit of a rise, and it's Henderson Hall, where the Marines are located. Right next to Henderson Hall is Fort Myers, the old guard who do the ceremonies over at Arlington, and were securing us that day. Where they're located, and right below that is the Pentagon. Everything was still as it was moving. Nobody was cutting in line. The cars were very, very respectful as you go past. As you're up at the top, and as we start coming down, I think we all saw the firefighters. They'd hung that flag on the side of the Pentagon. And as you crested the hill and start coming down, and all DC lays out before you, you could see that flag, and people were honking their horns and raising their fists out their windows, and to say, we will survive. We're going to respond. We love everybody in the country, and everybody had to go through that experience. But it was amazing to see that flag, and just by talking it, I'm getting chills again. The other thing that was interesting, several months later, one of the major areas that was hit in the Pentagon, the Navy Command and Control Center was hit, where the plane went in. The Army's Deputy Chief of Staff for Personnel, now it's called the G1, it was hit. The G1 put out a video later, and the video was in honor of all the members that they lost that day. But what it said, it started off with September 10th. September 10th, the men and women of the Desper came to work. September 11th, the men and women of the Desper came to work, and then our world changed, and they documented what happened. But I thought the most interesting thing is what they did at the end, and it said on September 12th, the men and women of the Army Desper came to work. And I think that's what we all experienced. On that day, the shock of it, overall, we all have our experiences. Mine are tied more to the Pentagon than to New York City or into Pennsylvania, because I was there. And I experienced it not from the building, but I experienced it from the area. But I think what we learned, what we experienced as a country, we long for those that gave their lives in the defense of freedom, but we were resilient, and we were determined overall that we were going to rise again as a nation, and we have, and we did that day. So my thoughts and prayers are with the over 3,000 who lost their lives on that day in New York, or in the Pentagon, or a field in Pennsylvania. And for all those who served in uniform, who have served in Afghanistan and Iraq and Syria and dangerous places across our world, that defend our freedoms and our liberties and our way of life. It's indelible for all of us who experienced that day firsthand. It's something we will never forget, but where we've come as a country since that time has been remarkable, and I thank you for all your service, and God bless you, and God bless your families. Thank you.